This is a continuation of a reading of the second Theaetetus, or the Theaetetus II, which is a sequel to Plato's Sophist and Statesman dialogues, and a sequel to his Theaetetus, which I am the author of, and again, which I claim as having been foretold by Plato in the Sophist and Statesman dialogues. When Theodorus tells Socrates that he will be 3 times as indebted, when after the Eleatic stranger illustrates the nature of the sophist, when he also illustrates the nature of the statesman and philosopher. And so foretells of a further discussion between the same characters within the same setting. And that is reiterated throughout the Sophist and Statesman, also in the Statesman, in the introductory passages. Theodorus asks the Eleatic stranger which he would like to explain next, which he would like to try to define next, the statesman or the philosopher. Implying always there's many implications of a continuation of the discourse with the target of investigation being the philosopher. Now, this portion will cover the more metaphysical part of the dialogue, as we left off at the point where the philosopher had to still be distinguished from the mathematician, and those were bound up in the same class. And the mathematician, as the exemplar of theoretical science, is apt to lay claim to having the chief position amongst the theoretical sciences. While the situation now calls for the philosopher to compel the agreement of the mathematician, to agree that there is a science above arithmetic and geometry. That is, since the mathematician was used to distinguish theoretical science and to distinguish the philosopher from the sophist and rhetorician and such professions as those. That recourse has to be made by the philosopher in order to distinguish himself from the sophist, especially, and from the rhetorician, as being a, strictly speaking, pure theoretical science concerned with demonstrative proofs and with syllogistic reasoning. That is the part where we left off. And so a more open use of dialectic regarding metaphysical questions of the unity of being or the multiplicity of being, and the difficulty of reaching a conclusion about those, will be sort of cast over the mathematician, so that the mathematician is made to is compelled to admit that there is a science above arithmetic and geometry. While the course up till now has distinguished the philosopher in terms of the method of division which was employed and exemplified in the sophist and statesman dialogues, using, during the first part, the same exact divisions of classes into opposites, dividing classes into opposites with no intermediary, and following a chain of those. The same divisions that were displayed in the statesman dialogue. That was the first portion, where a division was made. I want to review this. A division was made between theoretical and practical expertise. There was expertise, and that was divided into practical and theoretical. And we followed that, and we used that in our investigation of the philosopher. We said, obviously, the philosopher must be placed in theoretical rather than practical. Practical meaning more so labor, of working with his hands and not having a knowledge. Then we followed the next division, also illustrated in the Statesman by the Eleatic stranger, of the whole class of theoretical science into that which directs some process via knowledge, and in opposition to that, that which is purely concerned with knowledge and speech or language and persuasion. That does not direct some process. From there, after agreeing that the philosopher should be placed in the class of theoretical science or expertise, which does not direct any process, but which is concerned purely with knowledge or speech and persuasion, we found a variety of characters who equally have claim and who are equally within that class at that point of the divisions made. For the sophist and the rhetorician and the mathematician and others are neither practical, but have to fall into the theoretical class, and within that, don't direct any process by their knowledge, but are purely concerned with knowledge or speech and persuasion and things like that. And thus far, we were able to follow the Eleatic stranger's lead displayed in the statesman dialogue. Or in that, the statesman was placed in the kind of theoretical science that directs some process. And so the philosopher and statesman part ways there. But we found the philosopher confounded with the sophist, the rhetorician, and the mathematician, among others. And so we had to separate after that, taking sort of a new beginning, starting with a new beginning, separated off the rhetorician and the sophist by a different maneuver. Again, with reference to the sophist and statesman dialogues, but we were no longer able to just follow the divisions illustrated in the beginning of the statesman. We distinguished the philosopher from the rhetorician by dividing the class of theoretical science, which does not direct any process, into those speaking from one to many, to a crowd, and those speaking between a discussion between two people. Place the rhetorician in the prior, and we place the philosopher in the latter. And from there, we still had to separate the sophist, because the sophist may also speak between two people. And we used a distinction which was made in the sophist dialogue by the Eleatic stranger, that the sophist, he said, makes images according to appearance, as opposed to making images according to proportion or likenesses. And note that when I say images and likenesses in this sense, I mean in the way that speech is the image of thought, not as drawings. Although the sophist was likened to a painter because he makes images in speech, images of thought in speech, according to appearance, as a painter paints a coastline. And we said that to follow a sophist, which many people do today, as following an Eastern guru or something. Those kind of people are following a painting of a coastline as if they were following a map, and so are bound to meet destruction or to find harm in various ways. As the sophist speaks authoritatively about all things and must be making appearances, speaking about all things. Then we sort of reverted, and a distinction was made, not in classes, but a correction was made. A correction whereby we said that the order of those divisions was the reverse of what they should have been. That the order of separating the rhetorician off first, speaking from one to many instead of speaking between two interlocutors, was the wrong order of divisions. And we should have separated off the sophists first, as those making images or likenesses according to appearance, not proportion, rather than first separating off the rhetorician. And this might seem like a subtle distinction or superfluous or something like that. But the Eleatic stranger, by correcting previous error, greatly elucidates the process of the method of division, which is what we use up to the point we're at now. Because if we separated off the rhetorician first, as though speaking from one to many, then the sophist would be, and we place the philosopher as those speaking between two interlocutors. As again, we said, all education and in practical disciplines, a master and apprentice. A master teaches an apprentice according to not speaking to a crowd. And nobody picks up the knowledge of anything by hearing a single discourse about something. That the sophist would then have to be portioned out, have to be divided from the philosopher. From within the same class. We're basically saying that that's too close between the sophist and the philosopher. where we could distinguish both the rhetorician and the sophist from the philosopher by first saying both of those, the sophist and the rhetorician, make images according to appearance, not proportion. And then we take that class, which is opposite to the one we place the philosopher in, and we divide that into making speaking from one to many and speaking with individuals. And that is only to show that there is an importance of the order of the divisions made. That the prior divisions there's an essential reason why those come first. But those were easily distinguished. Those distinguishers were accurate. We just have to take them in the reverse order. And then we find the philosopher confounded with the mathematician, because the mathematician is the exemplar of making images according to proportion, which is the class we place the philosopher in. And making images, again, I mean images in the sense that speech is the image of thought, or that speech is the image of thought in sound. And we tried to focus this on within language, within words, within speech. As the mathematician, the real geometer, uses propositions with terms of language, with words, not just drawings, and not just algebraic symbols, of course. Now, there were three other points that were made, or three other arguments besides the distinguishing of the philosopher, or the finding his class within that sort of chain of genuses and species. And I should remind you that each portion, each class, each species, those different characters or different sciences are equally included in whatever one they fall into at that part of the divisions made, at that point in the process. That's why we end up at the point we are now with the philosopher and the mathematician equally within the class of theoretical knowledge that does not direct any process, but is only concerned with words and knowledge and persuasion. That makes images in speech of thought according to proportion. And we could say speaks from one to one in a discourse between two people, rather than speaking from one to many, to a crowd. That's the point we left off, and the point at which the mathematician and the philosopher are both equally within that class. These aren't questions of more or less. And each division is, technically speaking, a contrariety. So that between practical and theoretical, there is practical expertise, and then there is not practical expertise. And everything that is not practical expertise is theoretical. There is theoretical expertise, and there is not theoretical expertise. And everything that is not theoretical expertise is practical. So that there isn't a mean, there isn't something in between. There's no place for anything to fall in between. They are not opposites, or they're not contraries in the sense that there's some continuum between them, or there's some spectrum. Each of them are the negation of the other. So if you are one, then you're not the other. And if you're not the other, then you are the one. Or if you're not one of them, then you are the other. And if you are one of them, then you can't be the other. And you have to fall within one of them. If you're some kind of expertise, if you have a certain kind of expertise, which is what is the genus that we're working with. That is important, and each of those are divided in half, that there is no third division, there's no fourth division. And the Eleatic Strencher makes this clear. That is why when he makes a correction, he says, wait, we have to go back. You can't divide humans off from animals as all of these from this one without going through two-legged and four-legged, winged and unwinged, and so on, dividing them into halves. So there's two contraries, or two contrarieties, technically speaking. But non-technically speaking, we could just say opposites with nothing between them, because they are that's a kind of opposition. We could say contraries. I don't think that is the issue worth quibbling over. There are three arguments that sort of come along by the way that have nothing to do with that, but are interesting. One is that making images according to proportion instead of according to appearance. We took that from the sophist dialogue and applied that here, because that also was making a distinction between the sophist and philosopher, but not explicitly saying that the philosopher falls into image making according to proportion, just going after the sophist. But we willingly say, yes, the philosopher falls into image making according to proportion. Perfect. That's the division we need. And we say that image making or likeness making references speech as an image of thought, which is something which is common in Aristotelian philosophy and so on. That kind of image making according to proportion, of speech as an image of thought, according to proportion, not appearance. That the importance of that is that the knowledge of the image conveys the knowledge of what it is an image of. That the knowledge of a likeness, the knowledge of an image, if the image is the image of thought, as in speech, conveys the knowledge also of what the image is of, as in the idea or the conception or anything like that. So that we reach sort of by the way. We pick up that by the way, because we're going through these divisions and that's just like a gem we pick up along the way. That knowledge of an image according to proportion has to convey knowledge of what is an image of. Then also, we say, or we find out, or we discover that things that are alike really are what they are alike. In the geometrical way of speaking of things. As isosceles triangles are alike, all isosceles triangles are alike in technical geometrical language. All isosceles triangles are alike insofar as they are isosceles. And isosceles and equilateral triangles are alike insofar as they are triangles, insofar as they are triangles. And they are dissimilar or not alike insofar as they are not both isosceles or equilateral. That they are not that their dissimilarity is dissimilarity insofar as they are not both that class or that species or genus. And that their likeness, the squares and rectangles, for example, are both alike insofar as they both are quadrilateral figures. That squares and rectangles are alike. They're similar insofar as they both are quadrilateral figures. And they're unlike or dissimilar insofar as they are not both square or rectangles. Or really insofar they are not alike, or they're dissimilar insofar as they are not both equal-sided quadrilateral figures. Again, that things are alike, things that are alike, their likeness is that they are what they are like. Not in terms of the two individuals are the same individual, but that their likeness is in terms of a substantial class or an essential class. And that likeness between the different cases of, say, isosceles triangles is insofar as they both are isosceles. That's what makes them alike. In geometry, two figures, if both isosceles triangles are alike, they're similar figures in the technical language of geometry. That's how we speak. That is to say that in the geometrical way of speaking, things that are similar are what they're similar to, and not from two cases amongst each other, but with reference to a third thing that those both have reference to. That the individual cases of isosceles triangles aren't both the same individual, but that they both are isosceles. And that's what makes them similar. Then, to move on, we also found out or discovered along the way, that was not part of the divisions of finding the philosopher, sort of a critique of the sophist, of the course of investigation of the sophist by the Eleatic stranger. Since the first 3 or 4 or 5 definitions of the sophist referenced his making money or focus on money or interest in money as a moneymaker, as distinct from the philosopher, which we said was a sort of valid critique, because the sophists were the most wealthy people in Greece at the time. And there was also many problems with them that didn't have to do with money. We said that is insufficient to distinguish the sophist from the philosopher. And that eventually occurs in the sophist. However, a great many attempts at a definition point to his making money as distinguishing the sophist from the philosopher. And we said that we can write that off, because something that is common to all sciences and all crafts, as exchange for money is, can't be the factor with which we distinguish one of them from another. And this argument is found in perhaps a slightly different form, practically adopted from the first book of the Republic, one of the best arguments from the first book of the Republic, which was written separately than the other books, was first and kind of a complete dialogue on its own. The rest of the Republic was written after. Where the argument was that a ruler rules for the benefit of the ruled, that the ruler doesn't rule for the benefit of the ruler, but the ruler rules for the benefit of the ruled. And because every craft, science, every art, every profession has claim to that profession or that craft. Every craftsman has claim to their craft insofar as they have the ability to benefit some subject, not themselves. Whereas the collection of money or the benefit in any way of the craftsman or the artist or the scientist it does not reference sort of the art itself. As the physician of medicine only is a physician insofar as he can produce health in the body, not insofar as he collects pay, not insofar as he is benefited himself in any way, insofar as he can produce health in the body and rid disease. And the cattle rancher only is a cattle rancher insofar as he benefits cattle. That he can make them better cattle, that he can make them stronger and more of whatever qualities make good cattle. Not that he has his eye towards the slaughterhouse. nor towards his pay. That again, the physician of health, or the physician of medicine, only is a physician. What makes the physician a physician is his benefiting the body, is ridding the body of disease and producing health in the body. That is what makes the physician a medical physician. Without that, he has no claim to the science. And that argument is used in the first book of the Republic to argue that the ruler rules for the sake of the ruled and not for the ruler, because within every expertise, within every craft, what makes the craftsman a possessor of that craft is his ability to produce something in his subject, not to acquire anything for himself. That is why we say that the sophist cannot be distinguished from the philosopher by reference to money making. Instead of reference to the subject of his art, there has to be a difference. There has to be more of a difference in something that is common to all crafts, as money making is. There has to be a difference in their subject matter of the craft or the science. Because again, as gymnastics or the personal trainer and the medical physician both have as their subject matter the benefit of the body. One in terms of beauty and strength, and one in terms of health. But if we just say that if we only knew that they both benefit the body in some way, but we can't make out what that is. And we say that and hypothesizing, assuming that one of them made money, the gymnast, the gymnastics, the personal trainer, and the medical physician did not collect pay, which in some places is sort of the case or has been in the past. Then we couldn't distinguish them, which are both set over the benefit of the body, by one collecting pay, the physician, the gymnastics or personal trainer, and one of them not collecting pay. We have to reference their subject matter and distinguish something within that as one of them being concerned with health, or the gymnastics or the personal trainer is not concerned merely with health, but with strength and proportion of the body, beauty perhaps, excellence in a sense that is not health. Those arguments were sort of included within the method of division and the distinction between classes, which again, so far has placed the philosopher in the theoretical kind of expertise that does not direct any process, but is concerned with only knowledge and persuasion and speech, through which he makes images or likenesses according to proportion. And likenesses or images in the sense that speech is an image of thought or a likeness of thought, which even early modern philosophers repeat. And within that class, we find the mathematician and the philosopher both. And the mathematician as the exemplar of theoretical science. As a mathematician might even and often as today, and perhaps over the course of many ages, has said the philosopher is actually what you guys are saying about the sophist. All your arguments about the sophist refer also to the philosopher. There's no science of metaphysics. You people who are talking about metaphysics, are always speaking circularly, or you can't agree about conclusions, or you can't even agree about axioms and postulates. Still, we have no, they would say now, we can't even, you don't even have postulates yet, you're still, they would say that philosophy, the mathematician would claim to be to have domain over the theoretical sciences, as all those are really applications in one way or another of mathematics, or many of them. Many of the obvious ones are direct applications of either arithmetic or geometry, as harmonics and astronomy are. And so where we are now is at the point where the philosopher has to struggle with the mathematician to compel the mathematician to agree that there's a science above mathematics and above arithmetic and geometry. And so the field is sort of opened to a plane at that point, and we abandon the method of division and use more regular dialectic without this sort of specific method, which is an important part of dialectic for finding a definition. And again, the mathematician is an important figure to bring into the dialogue because of the characters. There's Theaetetus, who Euclid's last book and most complex and difficult book of his Elements simply restates. He is not the author of those proofs or of those problems, though he might be of some. He collects those from many places, and Euclid's Elements is a collection of, the final book is a collection of Theaetetus's discoveries. And Theodorus, the other mathematician that is present. So there's a reason why the mathematician is sort of brought into this discussion as the final character that needs to be separated from or distinguished from the philosopher, and who really does lay claim to the sort of leading position of the theoretical science, with the simple claim that there is no metaphysics, that metaphysics is a fruitless labor, as practically all philosophers have said since either Immanuel Kant or before that. Or perhaps some think there's some sort of metaphysics, but they take a new approach. They discount metaphysics as classic metaphysics. And they sort of take their own, they blaze their own path. So since that is the way things are now, as metaphysics is said by Kant, I believe, to not be a science, that metaphysics is either not possible or a fruitless endeavor, or that kind of stance is what modern philosophy basically as a whole, besides some figures who just try things from their own either whim or talent, or since that is the position of philosophy now, and that has also been the position of many philosophers have tried to say, oh, well, metaphysics can't reach a positive conclusion. Things like that. The mathematician then is apt to lay claim to the leading position of the theoretical sciences, because without metaphysics, the mathematician can claim to be the leading of the leader of the theoretical sciences, as being directly applied to produce the other theoretical sciences. So that is where we left off, and I think I will end this video and consider this as a summary and useful as a sort of paraphrasing of something that might have seemed complex, or sort of trying to simplify that, at least simplifying the maneuvers without reference to anything else that could get in the way, including characters, including anything else that could make the continued reading of that result in losing track of there's this point in the process dealing with the method of division, and then we have to separate off the rhetorician and the sophist, and we play around with that, and then we have to in the next portion contend with the mathematician and distinguish those. Contend with the mathematician for the leading position of the theoretical sciences. And that's why what will follow next will be a more metaphysical discussion, dealing with whether being is one or many, and kinds of questions that are meant to confound the mathematician. And reach a result, but also meant to, since we're dealing with the idea that the mathematician lays claim to the theoretical sciences, because only through that were we able to say that, because the mathematician is the exemplar of using proportion, but then what we said were images, to convey knowledge and to make proofs and to demonstrate conclusions, which we need to distinguish the philosopher from the sophist and from the rhetorician especially. Those without the mathematician, we would have great difficulty distinguishing what philosophy should be from what sophists are involved in. Because the mathematician is the exemplar of demonstrative proofs. And we want to use that as a model in our investigations and our demonstrations about things that are not shapes and numbers. Also, again, because the characters are wont to discuss the differences between mathematics and philosophy and mathematics and things within those terms. And speaking with the Theaetetus, you have to sort of use his strengths of what he knows to or style things towards his expertise in mathematics or his growing expertise in mathematics. As Theaetetus didn't produce, I'm not sure, dialogues or philosophical works, but he produced all of the problems and proofs in the final book of Euclid, that was the Platonic solids, presumably under the auspices of the Academy. But I'm not sure that we find dialogues written by him or philosophical works. Obviously, he leaned more towards mathematics. And this is sort of Socrates' attempt to bring him further into philosophy. So that is where we will pick up in the next video, an actual reading of the portion that I said we would. Go over a reading of in this video. But that explanation or that summary or paraphrasing of the maneuvers made, I think is important, and those three other arguments.